Hi students, we're going to start an earthquake and volcano project. It's worth quite a few points, so it's important that you understand the directions. So the ultimate overlying problem is, do the locations of earthquakes and volcanoes on Earth create a pattern? Use if, then, because format. So for your hypothesis, before we even get started, I'd like you to write, if earthquakes and volcanoes happen on Earth, then, and right here you're going to decide if they form a pattern or create a pattern or not, and then you're going to write your reason why. So if earthquakes and volcanoes happen on Earth, then they create a pattern because, or if earthquakes and volcanoes happen on Earth, then they do not create a pattern because. So do that right now. Now let's look at the materials. So we'll be using a globe, a world map, internet or reference material, and colored pencils. So we're going to plot the earthquakes and volcanoes that Mrs. Massaros has given you on your map. Find at least 7 additional volcanoes and 18 additional earthquakes that have occurred outside the United States. You may want to highlight this part so that you remember, on top of the ones I gave you, you're going to need 7 more volcanoes and 18 earthquakes that occur outside the United States. Now it's important that you follow the outside the United States rule, simply because it'll make your life easier when you're answering questions. So using the reference material provided by your teacher, and you're going to list them below. After you record the 25 data points, determine the plates that are involved and plot them on a map by numbering each earthquake or volcano according to your data table. Now, although those instructions seem overwhelming, I'm going to walk you through each step. So first of all, let's get started and create our key, because we're going to be using this as we plot. So the shallow earthquakes are red, and they happen between 0 and 70 kilometers down inside the Earth. Intermediate earthquakes are blue, and they happen between 70 and 300 kilometers down into the Earth. And then deep earthquakes will be green, and they happen between 300 and 650 kilometers within the Earth. And then finally, you're just going to use a regular pencil to make a triangle for a volcano. So I'd like you to make that key on your map. I did mine on the upper right-hand corner. You may choose to do it maybe on the bottom corner. So I'd like you to put that on your map right now. Okay, now I'd like you to look at your data table. So I've done some for you where I've actually put all the information in, as well as whether it happens on a continent or an ocean, and the plates are involved. Now when you put your own data in here, you're going to have to decide if it takes place on an ocean or continent and which plates are involved. Now, don't be concerned that you won't know this information or that you need to know the region just by looking at a map. You will get that data either from the packets that I have or from the websites. So let's look at the first one. We have the Fuji Islands that happen in the ocean. It is an earthquake. The latitude is negative 18.4. The longitude is about negative 178. And we have the plates involved as well as the magnitude and the depth. Now notice we have these negatives. The negative sign for latitude means it's south of the equator. So when you're looking at your map, That means it's happening on this half of the equator. This longitude has negative 177, and that means it's west. So it's going to be happening on the west part of the prime meridian. So basically it will be happening in this bottom left quadrant. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to put a negative sign under west so that when we see that on our data table, we know that that is negative. And I'd like you to put a negative sign under south. Because when we do latitude, and it's negative, it's going to be south of the equator. Also, to make your life a little bit easier, I'm going to have us label the quadrants. So when you look at the latitude and longitude numbers, you'll know exactly where it's taking place. So in the upper left-hand quadrant, I'd like you to write positive, then negative. So that means the latitude number would be positive, or north, and the longitude number would be negative, or west. So that would be happening in this quadrant right here. For the next upper right-hand quadrant, I'd like you to write positive and positive. That means the latitude is north and the longitude is east. So it's happening in this part of our map. On the bottom right, it would be negative and positive. So our latitude would be south of the equator, but to the east of the prime meridian. And lastly, the bottom left-hand quadrant would be negative, negative. That means south of the equator to the west of the prime meridian. So now you have an idea about where each of these are taking place by simply looking at the positive and negative numbers. So let's look at the first one. The first one is the Fuji Islands. The latitude is negative 18 and the longitude is about negative 178. So let's plot that on our map. So since the latitude is negative and negative, I know it's in this quadrant on the bottom left-hand side. So my latitude is negative 18. So if this is negative 15, then negative 18 is just going to be a smidge under there. My longitude is negative 178, so this is negative 180. So it means it's going to be a little bit to the right of that. So I'm going to put a dot right where those two intersect. And I'm going to label it number 1. Each piece of data on your data table is given a number. So you do not have to write Fuji Islands next to it. It'll take up too much room. We're just going to use number 1. Now when I look at the depth of the earthquake, it's about 491.5. So when I look at my key, it would be considered a deep earthquake. So I'm going to mark that with a green. Now I've done the plates involved in the continental ocean for you, but let's look at them. So because this island is kind of in the middle of the ocean, I made this ocean. And then when we look at the plates involved, this is the Pacific plate, and this is the little part of the Australian plate. So since it's right on the line, I made both, Australian and Pacific. Now when you're figuring out the plates involved, more than likely it will be 2 plates involved. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 3, but most often than not, it's 2. So let's do another one. So my next one is Nevada. Obviously it's in the United States, so it happens on a continent. The latitude is 41 and the longitude is negative 114. So this means it's north of the equator and west of the prime meridian. So it's going to be in this quadrant right here. So first I have to find my positive 41. So it's north of the equator. Well, this is positive 45, so this would be a positive 41 right about there. My longitude is negative 114. Well, here is negative 180, negative 165, and so on. So this one's negative 120, and this is negative 105. So it's going to be about here. And I'm going to write a number 2 here. Now I'd like to point out that these longitudinal lines are going to curve. So when you're trying to find a particular location, make sure you curve with the line. If you go straight down from the number, all your answers will be incorrect. So the depth of this particular earthquake is 10. So I'm going to make this red. Now the reason I chose red for our key on our shallow earthquakes is because shallow earthquakes do the most damage. So when you see a red dot, you know that it was probably a damaging earthquake.